lectures and, doing everything that we could in terms of enjoying ourselves in the first year. By second year, you start strategizing what next, what needs to be done. And the third year is when you are asked this question by your friends, teachers, family members, and everyone around you. What do you want to do next? So the presentation today is aimed at giving you some options for studying, as well as a few, like an insight into the career options graduate studies, and an insight into preparing while you are in, say, your first or the second year as well. So, some of the options that we generally have is, what should I do? So we, of course, have the option of pursuing advanced studies in your specific field. If somebody is from, say, Hindi honors or Punjabi honors and English honors, they can move towards a master's degree. Or if you take, you can move towards more specialized programs if you feel that you want to shift fields, and and other options tend to open up for you. A common option that is coming up, and it's really picking up pace in the near future, is that taking a gap year is something that most students want to take up. Now, a gap year is something that is not just a solution to take up, time out and start, exploring a year off from studies, a year off from work, and understanding what your interests are. This is a good opportunity to explore what your interests are if you've not really identified what you want to do. Also very tricky, because you may end up actually choosing something that you're not very aware of, because you've not really explored it much, or you've not researched about it enough, or you haven't really made a constructed plan. Now, when you don't have a plan, what happens is, your routine will be similar to the life during the lockdown, where you just sit at home, or you're, with your friends, you're around everybody, but you're not really doing anything constructive. So it's very important to plan a gap year well in advance to know what you're going to do in that one particular year of, not being enrolled in a college, not working, but understanding what you want to do. Now, the next few options are some of the things that you can make use of in your gap year and make it productive. One is, if you're not sure of which field you want to explore, you can work as an intern with different organizations. I have several students who take a gap year after their undergrad, and even after their high school for that matter, and they decide to take internships, let's say 3 months, 6 months, a month long, depending on what their interests are, to understand what, what they would like to study, what interests them, what does not interest them, and how the practical functioning of their areas of interest could be. Then along with that, you have your preparation for standardized tests and competitive exams. A lot of people don't actually prepare in time, say in the second year or the third year, when we can take standardized tests for studying, whether in India or abroad. So, taking a gap year can actually give you that 6 to 8 month period to prepare for the test, get ready, get a good score, and prepare well in time. That actually helps, because sometimes it's very difficult to manage with work or studies. Taking up these exams can take a toll. Get a full-time job. If you have an idea of what you wish to do, then you can take a full-time job, and you can definitely explore the idea of understanding what your interests are. Like, for instance, a lot of people take up the job of an editor or a copywriter or an editing assignment, and in the English honors field, or somebody actually go and work with firm to understand the practical application of what they should and they can do in the future, or take up accounting jobs and stuff, while they're also preparing for, say, the CA or civil services or other exams that they might take up. A common option that also some students take up is volunteering opportunities. Now, volunteering is no longer just going and attending or donating money. It is actually being actively involved with organizations that are working in the social development sector. Some of them could be as extensive as the Teach for India Fellowship, or other organizations that are working in the social development sector, where you can actually work around causing change, bringing about change for the society at large, and also bringing about change within yourself, because when you do a volunteering job, it actually brings a lot of change in you as an individual as well. Now, volunteering opportunities can be two types. One is like the Teach for India Fellowship, which is say 2 years in duration, and then they also have some short duration, in activities. You can also, keep those in mind per se. If you don't want to get into a full-time job, you can take up a part-time job while you prepare for, the standardized tests, competitive exams, or let's say if you want to be a part of your family business, for instance, or just want to work somewhere to get some exposure, but not be bound by the responsibilities and times of an intern or a full-time job. You can take up a part-time job, and more importantly, you can learn a new language or a skill with with the open courseware that is available nowadays, such as coursera.org or edx and harvardx. You can learn a number of skills sitting at home without actually going here and there. Or you can learn a language. Languages are French, Spanish, where people can take this up and they can actually help you in the long run, whether in India or abroad, wherever you are. So a couple of common options that students do take up when they are studying or they are looking at studying abroad is, taking up, an MBA as an option that comes up mostly. People in India start exploring, the CAT as an option, or even if you're looking at studying abroad, you can look at, the options like, going abroad for an MBA or a specialized master's or even a master's in India. Other common options that most students take up, after a bachelor's degree is getting into the profession of teaching and educating children, and at different levels, school, college, and other levels. So that's a bachelor of education or a master of education that they can take up. A field that commonly opens up for most, bachelors of arts students is law and civil services. So you can take up an option that is definitely there in terms of exploring. So I like the doodles that everybody is doing. It's quite interactive, but it just takes away the notes I'm making. So it'll be great if you can avoid on the questions that we
Anuga,
can come back to.
I just wanted to interrupt you for that. Look, there's no point if you are, students, if you are going to distract from the presentation like this, and, it's rather annoying and it's not funny. So I request whoever is doing this to stop it. If you can remove it, well and good. Because if I find I'm just going to ask, I want to ask you to leave, I will just delete it. I'll just remove you. So please don't, you have uh, time to come and present to you. If you're not interested, this is not compulsory, you may leave, but please don't waste other people's time. Thank you.
Ma'am,
Yes.
ma'am, you can enable the annotation.
Okay, thank you. I will request the host to do so.
Yes, ma'am.
I think
Yeah,
I
thank
can
you
also
so much.
do that.
Yeah, Anubha,
Anubha,
you
you are
can do
also
that.
co-host, so you could
Yes,
also do that.
yes, I just did that. I just removed them.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much for helping out on that. Thank you. Okay, so I'll continue. I think the doodles
You
on the
can
screen. Can
stop
somebody tell me?
presenting your screen and then present again, and then it will go.
Okay, just 1 second. I'll just do that. Thank you so much. Just a second. I think you can clear
मैम
also.
आपके टॉप पे व्यू ऑप्शन आ रहा होगा, उसमें एनोटेशन होगा, उसमें इरेजर से रब
हाँ,
कर
नहीं वो मेरा आ गया. I just saw that. I realized that there's something that's there. Thank you so much, guys, for helping and being patient during this art class that we've had simultaneously. Thank you. Right. So coming back to the what is an MBA? An MBA is actually a general graduate business degree that teaches students on various business and management skills. It also trains you on technical managerial leadership skills that come in handy at various stages in life. They may not be academic or professional. Now I think that you can hear me. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, yes, you're audible.
Yes, ma'am.
So it that help you in various walks of life. They may not be just limited to the fact that you are, just working in a professional space. You could actually also be involved in various roles in school, in college, or let's say you're working in an environment or in your personal life. An MBA can come and give you a number of skills that helps you work through. The reason a lot of students take up an MBA is obviously to progress their career if they're working, but it's also of more of skill enhancement, improving your job prospects, switching your fields. If you're, say, let's say if you're coming from, I did my master's in in international business management. I was a literature grad, so I wanted to explore the corporate world. So I switched over to an MBA. I decided to do a business degree, and that actually gave me a different perspective about how I could blend different aspects of my existing knowledge to move towards. So that's where you can create that that learning. And of course, the MBA also gives you a very strong alum network and gives you business associations, professional associations for a long time in life. And of course, it improves your salary if you have an MBA versus a general undergraduate degree. Some pertinent skills that you acquire during the MBA program are strategic thinking, problem solving, project management, logistics, understanding leadership, team building is very important, financial management, business analysis, and marketing and business development. Of course, your takeaways will also be dependent on your various specializations, and there are several of them. So just to give you an idea, these are the list of specializations in MBA. Some of them are very commonly heard of: finance, marketing, HR, international business, logistics and operations. And now the latest ones that are coming up are business analytics and data analytics, healthcare management, entrepreneurship, sustainability management, energy management, and rural management. These are the ones that are really coming up as fields because these are niche sectors. People are looking at coming on, getting more specialized people to come and work through. And if you don't want to do a specialization, you can even opt for a management degree or a dual degree in which you do a major in one and a minor in one if you're doing an MBA. So that is one aspect of the MBA degree, which is again a common degree program that anyone from every background can apply. These are some of the skills that you have when you're doing an MBA program. So if you're doing finance, you learn skills like mergers and acquisitions, corporate financial planning, or if you're moving towards marketing, which is very diverse, you can move from sales to marketing, etc. You can also move from, let's say you want to blend HRM and you want to understand how people work and how people management is. So you can move towards talent management. Recruitment and training is the normal process. And then obviously compensations and understanding labor laws is very important. International, the world is globalizing, and the way we are digitizing everything, people are opting for various fields like international business, banking and financial services, and moving towards entrepreneurship and family business, nature of work. The one field that is really coming up in recent times is business analytics because of the way we are using data at present. We have a number of organizations that work purely on data. In fact, I think every organization, every institution works with data. So business analytics is a skill that is really doing the rounds right now. And people really look forward to getting people who have the skills, who have the knowledge, and who have the ability to do analysis data that they have for the benefit of the organization or the community that they're working with. And of course, rural management, very niche, but mostly with India coming into the picture, most organizations are looking for the rural segment developing because it in turn leads to an overall development of the economy. So an MBA in rural management could also be something that you could look at. And with COVID, healthcare management has really picked up pace with pharmaceutical companies mushrooming and looking at developing the vaccines and providing preventive healthcare and diagnostic chains and healthcare setups. So these are some of the fields that have really mushroomed in the past few years, and particularly in the last 1 year. So another field that most people actually take a look at is civil services. In fact, it gives you the opportunity to work for your community, for your country, and be able to bring about change in various sectors where you're actually, when you're actually assisting and to run their various departments and portfolios, and you also help in preparing their various drafts and legislation. They have various steps in the civil services process. So their step one is when you have your prelims, which is multiple choice questions, and you have two papers. And step two is when you have your main examinations, which is more descriptive, and it's quite an extensive, test system that is there. The final round being the interview, and the total number of marks when calculated puts being selected to many of the 23 different civil services service options that are there. One of obviously the top ones I have listed down for everyone's notice, because everyone knows about them: IAS, IPS, revenue services, foreign services, and the like. A common field that most people take up after a bachelor's degree is also law, because it allows you to practice in Indian courts and you acquire an understanding of the legal world. If you feel like you want to get more, an LLM as well. These are some of the fields, areas where people practice law, and they have different types of, advantages and, points that they add to any organization, individual, when they are looking at law as a field. Some of the skills that you can see are negotiation, conflict resolution, strategic thinking, problem solving, understanding legal procedures and stuff that are there. So legal profession is actually rewarding. It's a high professional degree, and it all you are in a change maker role where you can make a difference for some people and organizations. After a BCom degree, we have various options that we can look at. While the common ones I have covered in the previous slides, these are some of the other fields that you can take up where you're doing, the Master of Science in Actuarial Sciences, which is more statistic, more, analytical in nature. You can go for the traditional MCOM and move towards a career which also substantiated by where you take up the different stages of the examinations at different levels. Then you have banking and finance, which is also there, which is coming up and opens up avenues for investment banking and moves you to a different role. The American organization organized CFA, Chartered Financial Analyst role, also gives you the chance to, work at different levels of making a financial portfolio, making financial accounting principles, and doing financial management and planning for organizations and large-scale organizations. And B.Ed and MBA and civil services are definitely there. If you have any questions, you can keep posting them in the chat related to a particular slide, and we can come back to it so that we don't miss out on something that you may have as a question in the future. So I did English honors, and honestly speaking, there is any bachelor's degree that you do opens up several options for you. While what I am documenting are very traditional and very the common ones that are coming up, moving and switching over from one field to another at any given time. So if I talk about the Master of Arts in English, that's something that most people do, and then they substantiate it with an MPhil and a PhD if they want to, say, move towards a teaching profession. Then you have the MBA, like I did. I switched over to a management degree. I have several students of mine who are coming from an English honors background, moving towards creative writing because they want to explore different avenues to talk, to write, express themselves. And then you have journalism and mass media. I have friends who move towards, the journalism field. Some are features writers, some are, working with, high-flying fashion magazines as, writers, editors. And then we have people who are producers with radio channels and movie channels and, the OTTs that are coming up nowadays. You have your civil services, of course, and then specialized masters. And again, I think I've repeated civil services, bachelor's of education, and another field that most students tend to consider as sometimes Master of Arts in Linguistics, because it is actually the study of language, and this can apply to various fields. So you get to know a lot more. You explore the depth of the subject. You move towards exploring a wide variety of topics that are taught as part of the the linguistics program. So, and then you can move towards various roles that actually give you that advantage. And I just recently interacted with somebody who's done a master's DNM in linguistics, and this person is working in the advertising fraternity. So obviously, as I said, there is no that you have to be from one field to stick onto it. You can switch over to any field. So there is no restriction as such. So some of the programs, again, that you can take up after a BA honors in Hindi, Punjabi, or even the BA program, of course, are your traditional Master of Arts degrees, journalism and mass comm, and the others I've written. You can move towards screenwriting nowadays with with all these Netflix channels and your Amazon Prime. So much more screenwriting and moving towards filmmaking and other fields, that screenwriting is going to be one of the most sought after degrees in the coming few years. And moving towards your proficiency in Hindi and Punjabi, you can actually work with embassies, you can work with organizations that have a multicultural international perspective, where you can use your translation interpretation degrees, which are also, if you don't want to do a degree, you have diploma certificate options, which can actually give you the advantage to become a one. Because I recently if I talk about a senior of mine, she went to Stanford, and once she joined a company, she relocated to Japan. And because she did not know Japanese, she had to hire somebody as a Japanese English interpreter. And she was paying a good hefty sum per hour to that individual to be able to, interact and understand what documentation is being done. Even for a short trip, you have people who are going. So it's no longer the traditional, translator jobs that you see around are coming to visit, say, Delhi or another city, but it is actually moving to a much more global platform where you can do so much more with, what the work is all about. After pol science, I have several friends who did political science, and they've gone and done civil services. They've become lawyers, professional lawyers at that. They moved towards the latest fields of international relations, international affairs, and they're doing further studies in, human rights laws, peace and conflict resolution. With the way the world scenario is changing and the constant angst that we have, this is one of the fields that is really coming up, because people want you to understand, how to resolve conflict. They want peace to be restored. They want people to come and be able to understand, how to maintain diplomatic relations without controversy. So these subjects really are coming up in the long run. And then, of course, you have public administration, public policy. This actually can also be a spearheading point for you to move towards, let's say, politics, if you're interested in those, in the field of politics, or working as a political consultant or a political communication consultant for a political party or something on those lines. So you can actually use these as a reason, as an advantage point for moving towards that. And of course, you have the traditional civil services and MBA that is there. And of course, teaching is obviously as an option, rewarding career. Business economics opens up avenues for understanding, the world of economics, finance, and banking, and of course, actuarial sciences. So I think it is one of the most versatile economics degrees that one can take up. And if you are mathematically inclined, you're quantitatively inclined towards exploring a career in these fields, then statistics related actuarial sciences, or taking up economics and moving towards economic policy making, are some of the other fields that you can take up. Combining business economics, career, which gives you the advantage to work with organizations that are, say, doing financial analysis or economic analysis, like, say, Ernst & Young, KPMG, Deloitte, the big four, as we call them. So you can look at all, these companies as well, PricewaterhouseCoopers, where they want people with versatile backgrounds who understand different dynamics and understand different ways economics and finance can play a big role. So they can work through. And with banking and finance, you can move towards investment banking, and of course, as we discussed. But actual sciences statistically inclines you towards doing a lot more in terms of analytical roles. Particularly, you need to decide whether you want to move towards the more business-oriented side of things, or you want to move towards the more research and analysis-based side of things. So it depends on where you want to shift when you're moving there, per se. After history, you have your, obviously, the MA history, and the other programs. But these, as of late, we've had a lot of students who are coming of museum studies and heritage studies, because the way we are trying to preserve our history, our historical artifacts, or our the cultures of different communities within India and abroad. A lot of people are looking at museum studies and heritage studies from the traditional conventional programs of history, MA history, and mass journalism and mass comm and other fields. And of course, you can look at international affairs because you understand the cultural evolution, the historical evolution of different eras and times, and that also gives you a lot of advantage per se. So definitely that works through. And maths, of course, is one of the most most versatile program, if I may say so. Though I ran away from it from most part of it. That's because I used to love numbers, but I used to be very scared when I used to work with them. So maths opens up, being a quantitative subject, keeps you connected with quantitative computer applications. You can even do a master's of computer applications, substantiating certain skills, and you can move towards actuarial sciences or a master of science in maths. But you can also look at business analytics and data sciences, which actually opens up a lot of avenues and statistical programs that are there, which gives you an advantage. If you want, you can go for an MBA after maths. You can move towards a technology role. You can move towards technology management. If you're looking at studying abroad, you can even look at options which give computational mathematics, which blends the technology part of it with mathematics. So a lot of fields open up with maths and gives you a lot of avenues to use your quantitative logical analysis skill set and across different fields. So that is definitely there. And of course, teaching is one of the options that is per se there, where you can move towards teaching at schools, colleges, but also being a critical part of the teaching fraternity at the volunteering organizations, like I mentioned, Teach for India. Several people who have done Teach for India fellowships, worked for a couple of years in a company that is providing K to 12 education training and to rural segments, and now they've started their own firms that are moving towards the field of your teaching students, creating edtech companies, launching them, maintaining them, and the like. So a variety of things are happening when you look at the scope of these fields per se. Some of the job options that you can look for are these. For instance, these are some things that you can look at per se. And you can also keep in mind that there is no single thought process that works. So as I said, I have people who've studied economics or sociology. They've gone on to do psychology, and then they've done their MA and then MPhil, and they're working as clinical psychologists or counseling psychologists or therapists who are. Or if I talk about my own self, for that matter, from literature to business to counseling, if you see, there's correlation, but there's no correlation. Had I come from a psychology background, it would have been, say, a better option. But then there is no diversification that can be demarcated on the basis of what your previous background is, because we are moving towards shifting over. We are moving towards blending and amalgamating various interests. So you don't need to stick to one particular field. You can move towards to another. So keep your options open, keep exploring your interests. That's what's more important. And as for the government jobs, we have the regular civil service roles, but you can also take up the the SSC exams that are there for the postgraduate level, and then you have your state level examinations for government roles, or the PO roles, the PO probationary officer exam banking and PO roles that you have. So you have these entrance examinations that are there. This is for, again, India mostly. But again, if you are looking at something, work and build your way through, and getting a qualification from that particular country can actually help. Again, I've tried to segregate them into different groups so that you can understand why the correlation is there. So if I talk about accounting professionals, you can move this from an MBA degree. You can move towards advertising, brand management. social media management, digital marketing. These are the fields that are really coming up with everyone moving online and moving to, the internet as a resource platform. So you can use that. I somebody who's a LinkedIn consultant who actually sits down and helps you build up your LinkedIn profile for a job. So the way we are diversifying is becoming more niche. There is an image management consultant, and helps you understand not only from the way you present yourself, but how to continue that image that you have across various fields. And of course, you have the more conventional ones that are interior designing. There is no, it's all skill set based, it's all interest based. There is no particular reason it or not choose it because you don't have a qualification in it. It doesn't matter. If you have a knack for it, explore it. There is no harm in whether it's interior designing, whether it's fashion designing, event planning. Airline has different roles, ground staff, cabin crew, you name it. There are several options available. And the more unconventional ones, like becoming an ethical hacker. No longer the photographer is the bhaiya who takes pictures in the weddings or in the events, but the conventional photographers are actually. So, it's not about just wedding, it's about, using photography as a career and being associated with organizations like National Geographic. I don't know how many of you would remember the movie where Ranveer Singh, Ranveer Kapoor actually played the role of a travel blogger and a travel documenter. So those kind of roles can actually come up, and commercial pilots. In fact, you can even become a software developer, even if you don't have a technology background, because it all depends on whether you want to develop your skills based on your interests. The influencer stage that we are in, people are moving to professional YouTubing and graphic designing, and there is an overlap, because as I said that there is no restriction on what your skill set is. Gone are the days when we had these big blocks of either the teaching profession or the MBA, law, or just becoming, just joining the family business. There is so much more that you can do. That overlap and that versatility opens up several options and avenues for you. Even if you don't have a background in finance, but you dabble with stock market, go ahead, become a stock market consultant. But of course, monitor your progress. You can be a travel consultant. I'm an education consultant with no formal training, if I may say so, in the education field. But with 15 years of experience, you have that experience that adds up to it. Of course, we've been trained at different roles at various organizations from people across the world, people from Harvard, Princeton, and all these places who've been coming. But that's also because we built tax consultant. All these are interest-based, trainings that you can take. Sometimes they are interest-based, jobs that you want to take up. So all these things actually come in, give you that exposure that you want to do. And of course, you can be an editor across languages. You can write across languages. You can do filmmaking. You can be a legal consultant, psychologist, as I mentioned. You can be a translator, language trainer. Use the skill of a foreign language to advance yourself more unique and make yourself more indispensable. These things actually go a long way. Now, apart from the generalist perspective, a lot of students tend to look at studying abroad after a bachelor's degree. And the reason we do so, and full regard to the education system in India, because I'm a product of this education system, the kind of flexibility and the academic excellence across certain fields that we get abroad is far more versatile than the Indian education. Again, we are theoretically very strong thanks to the same education system. So it's very important to understand that each has its own, advantages and disadvantages, or I wouldn't say disadvantages, but areas for scopes for improvement per se. So while we're theoretically strong here in India, we know our basis, we know our theory. Going abroad opens up avenues for more flexible learning systems, practical learning systems that actually give you the advantage to apply the knowledge you've learned here in India as well. You are exposed to different methods of learning and applying what you've learned. And of course, you get an international exposure, you have employment opportunities. And if you're not able to afford them, there are avenues for also finding ways to support yourself financially through scholarships and other mediums, which I'll try and cover in the next few slides. So these are some of the popular study abroad destinations that we do have, most students applying for. And of course, US, UK, Canada are the sought after ones in Singapore. Europe is versatile with various destinations, and then Hong Kong, Australia are the other destinations. New Zealand is also there, but these are the common ones that come up per se. Standardized tests are some of the tests that we need to take up to make your application stronger when we're applying or meet the eligibility criteria. They also give a chance for the universities to understand what do you bring to the class. Say tests like the GRE and GMAT test your verbal reasoning and quantitative skill set, ability to write, and put your point across are done through IELTS, TOEFL, and PTE, where you're able to talk about your ability to communicate in a language. While if we do converse in English, it is still not our native language. So some organizations or some colleges prefer you to have a certain score, and you need to meet them for the visa requirements also. So these are the standardized tests that are required, and they give an idea to the admissions committee on where you stand when there's programs and options per se. This is an insight into the various tests that are there. The GRE has 3 sections, which is verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning, and analytical writing, like I said. They have a scoring pattern of 260 to 340 as a minimum score, with each score between each section being 130 to 170. And the analytical writing section, which is an essay section with 2 essays, has a 0 to 6 scale. You can take the test up. It's valid for 5 years. Tend to take up the GRE, the GMAT in the final year of their college or the second year of their college, because the scores are valid for 5 years. So in case you feel that there is scope for improvement, it works well. An average score could be anything between 310 to 315, but obviously as it goes for the GRE, as the higher the better. For the GMAT, it could be an average score of 650 to 700. The higher the better. And again, the scores are valid for 5 years. And they have 4 sections which are there, which are graded. And it's very tough. Most students tend to stick between 48 and 49. And this actually assesses your ability to manage your time, because it's a computer adaptive test. And subject GRE, of course, as listed, there are 6 subjects. They have, various questions. They have various fields that they want specialized knowledge or more advanced knowledge from, say, students who are applying for master's or doctoral studies. So they ask these students to take up these subject tests to validate their understanding of the concepts of these subjects and topics per se. That is there, and these are only conducted 3 times a year. Unfortunately, due to COVID, this was cancelled in September and October. But if anyone is interested in applying abroad for higher studies and want to establish, let's say, their understanding of a particular topic, or say they've not performed as well in a subject, but they still feel that they could have done better, they can do so by sending in a subject GRE score, as it validates what you have. It cannot take away the grade that is there, but it camouflages or validates the score or the field, whether it's physics, psychology, maths, or literature. Depends on which one you're taking up per se. These are the English proficiency examinations. We have TOEFL, which is administered by ETS. The IELTS, I'm sure most of you would have heard of the IELTS Academy, which is organized by 3 organizations, but 2 testing organizations conduct them, which is British Council and IDP Australia. And then we have the Pearson Test of English, which is conducted by Pearson. Reading, listening, speaking, and writing for the TOEFL and IELTS, the more common options that are there that we take up for students for universities abroad. Not all colleges accept the PTE, but most have started accommodating tests like Pearson Test of English or Duolingo, because they feel the COVID has given us avenues. But they could be temporary acceptances, but TOEFL and IELTS would stay for forever. The scores are valid for 2 years each, and there are 4 sections, like I said, while the TOEFL is on a 0 to 30 band, on a scale of 0 to 30 with 120. IELTS is assessed on a 0 to 9 point band. And a good score in TOEFL would be anywhere around, say, 100 and above, and around 20 to 25 in each section would be an ideal score, depending on the program you're going in for. Some programs may ask for, say, higher score ranges as well. And then an average score in IELTS would be around 6.5 to 7 on an average. And of course, the higher the better, but certain sections might require 7 or 7.5. For certain programs, it could be higher to 7.5 and 8 overall score, and that is one that is there. And around 80 is a good, 70 is a good score for the PTE that we generally tend to, see what the universities accept. And you can register online. There are certain free score reports that you get with all the tests. So you need to understand when and where you can report them. And that's one of the things. You get your scores within a few days of taking the test per se. These are some of the degree durations that we have. So if you talk about the US, we have 1 to 2 years, and the UK is largely 1 year unless you're going for a PhD degree, which is 3 years. The US PhD degree could be anywhere around, say, 3 to 7 years, with the first 3 years being your qualifiers and your lab rotations or the program rotation, department rotations that are there. Canada, again, is very similar to the US, 1 to 2 years of degree programs. If you're going to a university, if you're going to a college, the diploma or the PG certifications could vary, but on an average, the qualification for a master's degree is 1 to 2 years. And the PhD, again, is 3 to 7 years. Australia also is very similar in these lines. 3 to 5 years is the PhD, 1 to 2 years is the master's. Singapore similarly is going to be the same line, and mostly was the same for all the countries per se. But some European countries also give you the option of doing a PhD in less than 3 years. So that is also a possibility. So it depends on, but the minimum timeline is 2 years and above. So that is also an option that you can consider. But if you're going to a European destination, the language can tend to be a slight barrier. So it's always important to, know that which country you're going in for. These are the standardized test requirements according to each country. The US, of course, for various programs, they'll have some, the requirements that will vary, but they accept the GRE, the GMAT, and the subject GRE. They accept TOEFL and IELTS and, the other programs per se. And the GRE for certain programs, for GMAT, certain programs such as LSE might have certain requirements for the MBA program, and certain specialized masters at certain programs like London Business School, they might ask for the GMAT or the GRE. TOEFL and IELTS for any studies abroad would be a requirement, because while we know how to converse, while we are able to communicate and learn and have a real good channel of getting educated in this in English, it is not our native tongue, as I mentioned. So it is important to communicate, to live up to the rigor of the program. And same goes for Canada, GRE, GMAT for certain programs. Not all, GRE is not required for all, but most programs for the business schools might want the same. For the economics program also, they might want the same. GMAT, Canada also has a requirement for most people who are applying for a master's to look for a supervisor, which tends to be overlooked at times if you're applying for a non-thesis program also, because they want someone to monitor your performance, monitor the way you're studying and you're being taught the who put up that restriction. So, that's something that you can keep at the back of your mind. And then you have Singapore, which also, certain programs requires GRE, GMAT, but not as much. And Hong Kong and EU. European Union, very few colleges would ask for the GRE or the GMAT unless it's an MBA program. So it totally depends on what you are looking for. These are some of the deadlines that are there for studying. August and September is a normal start for the Northern Hemisphere, and it changes in the Southern Hemisphere for countries like Australia and New Zealand, which becomes February as their main start intake, and then July is the other start intake. And spring is when we have classes starting in January and February. Fall is the most common intake that every university offers, whereas spring is offered for certain programs, certain departments, and it may vary depending on the number of students who are applying. So they may not have all students available for spring. So if you are looking at going abroad, my recommendation is, and you want to have maximum options to choose from, fall should be the term that you're looking for. In terms of the deadlines, while the MBA program requires several rounds of deadlines, they have like first round and second round and third round, and sometimes even goes up to the fourth round. It's always recommended for international students to go between round 1 and round 2, because not only does it keep the options open for admission, but also for funding and financial aid, if any. They have one single deadline, but we tend to apply this as soon as possible, because there may be some internal scholarship deadlines or financial aid deadlines that we can look for. For studying abroad and doing an MBA, it's recommended to have around, say, 2 to 3 years of minimum work experience, because that's the requirement for most countries. In fact, in my experience, if I was to also share my journey, I felt that if I had done, say, a year's work experience, and I knew if I would go back to study, taken a year out or 2 years to work and then go for an MBA or a master's program in business, because it actually gives you the advantage that you see when you know what you will apply that knowledge for. When I was in class, we were thankfully, my program was a master's degree. We did not have a lot of people who were coming with experience, but the ones who came with experience, say the 1 or 2 people who came with experience, they had a very different contribution to the class. And I think our takeaway was more when we came to learning from these people experiences, because we were fresh graduates. So if you are looking at an MBA, even if you're looking at, say, the Indian options like the ISB that is there, or the IIM, I would recommend get some experience before you move towards, going for an MBA program, because while it's very easy to go for a CAT training after you're in your final year and completing your undergrad, the takeaway in the long run will be far better if you do take out a year or two to, get some professional experience and be able to apply them as well. Of course, it's a personal choice and it makes a lot of difference. But if you know that you're not going to go back to study, then you start earning. Once you start earning, then I think completing a master's degree in continuity makes more sense. But if you think you can, you would definitely make that switch over, and there is no personal or family obligation to do so. And then you can obviously, take some time out to study. So a challenge that comes up for most places outside India would be the 3-year undergraduate degree that we have. While the US, Canada, and most European places have a requirement for a 4-year undergraduate degree, we do know we have ways to combat it, so that's not so much of a concern. But the only thing is, you may be losing out on certain options because you don't have a 4-year undergraduate degree, which is there. So US, again, as mentioned, requires most students to have a 4-year undergraduate degree. It is completely the department and the program's discretion to see if they will accept a 3-year degree. If, let's say, have some experience, you can blend it together and create a value add that can go a long way when it comes to being considered for admission. But then again, it will be the department and the admissions committee's discretion. What combinations actually work are 10 plus 2 plus 3 plus 1 or 2, depending on the duration of the program, from a NAC accredited diploma or a master's degree. If you're doing a 2-year master's, please do not leave it midway, because most universities, unless giving you a full grant on master's degree, would be okay. But we recommend that if you have taken up a course, try and complete the course in its full continuity, because then it doesn't come back to you later if the rules change at the university's end. So, if you are taking a 1-year diploma or a 1-year master's, perfectly fine, go ahead, covers up the 16th year. But if you're taking a 2 years, go through the entire 2 years and then go for the second degree qualification if you think you can work through. Most distance learning programs are also accepted as part of this, so we can always look for the avenues there. For Canada, for the US, some colleges prefer to have an evaluation done from an external organization, which evaluates your grades, the program that you've done, the curriculum and everything put together, to see how you would actually fit into the requirement of the credits or the course units that are required for an undergraduate equivalent in these countries. So they will do that analysis and then decide whether your qualifications meet up to the requirement or not, even without the additional 1 or 2 years of the NAC accredited programs for the. So it totally is, again, as I said, it's dependent on the university. So if you're applying with your 3-year undergraduate degree with no substantiated master's or diploma, then it's strongly recommended to reach out to the department to understand via email what they have to say, or if they're visiting, the campus, or they have an online session, it always helps to keep them in mind. UK, Australia, and Singapore, for most programs, because the system is very similar in tenure, they all have, they accept the 3-year undergraduate degree programs, should not be a. Europe, universities in Germany require a 4-year undergraduate degree program for nearly mostly all programs, but then other European destinations like Amsterdam and Belgium and Copenhagen and all these other places, Sweden might be okay with a 3-year undergraduate program. Again, program specific, department specific. There are no presumptions. Anytime you decide to go and look at any of these countries, please connect with the department via email so that it's a written record for you in the future. Fire back on the possibility of you applying and then not getting a chance to be even considered fair and square. So this is just an approximate expense range for you to understand what could be the annual expenses at universities in these countries. Again, this is an approximate range, keeping in mind, universities that are very low in the cost structure or are very high in the cost structure. These are averages. They could be universities much lower than this. Phi bracket also, or could be much higher than the 37 lakhs as the upper limit in most cases. So, it totally depends on how your, the program you're applying for, the location you are in, and the going rate of exchange at that particular, point of time. So, of course, it's calculated on the basis of the tenure you're staying and the location and everything, but it also depends on your living standards. Living expenses are usually inflated because they look at the international population at a larger viewpoint. But I've had students from India living a very comfortable life. If it says 10 lakhs within 6 to 7 lakhs, very comfortably without compromising on anything, because you're not spending and splurging in the same way as other students from other countries and nationalities would. You wouldn't be going and partying, and if you every other day or every weekend. But if you are going and partying, then at least you're realizing how much your budget planning is. So that's one of the ways. And of course, when you're ready to go, whichever year, the exchange rate will decide how much money you shell out. While the expenses can actually give you a shock with the numbers, the figures I just shared, there are avenues for scholarships that are also available for UK, Australia, and within India and abroad as well. So the US is also there. So maybe you could just make a note or take a screenshot of this. Actually, it could come in handy for you in the future. Moving to the next packet. Is basically a combination of your standardized tests, transcripts and mark sheets from University of Delhi, your essay, statement of purpose, personal statements, whatever is required from the application point of view, resume, letters of recommendation, interview wherever applicable, financial documents for your admission and visa, and any other kind of research, work experience, or extracurricular that you may have. Involves selecting the universities, of course, along with the country, choosing what goes in the application process. Your documents usually are what I've listed here. And then if there is an entrance test or there's an interview or there is any, any other process of extra evaluation through the recorded interviews or recorded essays, we look into those aspects while we're looking at the application process. You, of course, have the student visa, which is required for studying abroad, not within India, but of course abroad. So the resume is actually supposed to be an insight into what you present. Some colleges abroad may mention, your, a specific format. So keep a tab on that. Essay, statement of purpose, personal statements, mostly you have to look at the grammar. You have to look at your, the word count, any other specifications of font, etc. that is there. Of course, addressing the questions that have been asked. And recommendation letters from your faculty is very, very important because they give an insight into your academic ability to participate in events and activities. So, when you are about to take your recommendations, I know teachers are listening, the faculty is listening, but whenever you have to take your recommendation letters, be extra nice to them. So they give what you want to put in the recommendation letters. Mostly they should be confidential, but it totally depends on, the institution you're taking it from. So totally works there. And of course, moving towards wrapping up the presentation, this is out with. We have profile building where we help you understand what activities you can do to identify your interests, say starting from year 1 to the final year and then preparing for your standardized tests. We have admissions consulting where we help you with the application documents and the interview and everything. And then of course the visa counseling part of things basically. And we help with standardized test preparation where we have individual guidance sessions. We have, we understand and help you prepare accordingly. We have study material and notes. We have, detailed doubt clearance sessions and focus on assignment-based and practice-based teaching. We do have a free demo class that we give at the start of the program. So if any one of you is interested and would like to get a diagnostic assessment, you can happily connect with us on the contact details below. And I personally am the one person you would meet when it comes to comprehensive counseling sessions and helping you build your profile. So I look into selection personality, where you would excel, where you would not excel, look at all the stages of the application process, help you brainstorm your applications, fill them up, review them, help you prepare for the mock interview rounds and follow-up discussions, and of course, prep you for the visa interviews as well. And we can, because you're coming from the college, we usually have an initial consultation, but if you're coming from the college, then we can give you a free initial profile review as well. I think this is pretty much, summarizing everything. Open up the forum for questions if there are any.
Yes, Anubha, there are a lot of questions.
Okay.
First, I'd like to thank you for a very comprehensive talk. I'm sure, the listeners were engrossed.
They've not dozed off.
No, if anyone's asleep, please wake up. It's time for the question answer session. Okay, so first things first, the scholarships that you mentioned, these somebody's asking if scholarship can be provided in India as well for MBA. So the ones you mentioned are only for abroad options, right?
Yes. So what happens is when you're looking at Indian options, some colleges will have their internal, merit-based assessment of giving scholarships to students. And then there are certain organizations that do have individual focus, on MBA programs in India, but then they look at your academic merit and they also look at, your ability to work is in terms of experience and the kind of value add you add to the meritorious program. So they look at grades, they look at other factors. I can send you a list of the Indian scholarships if you want. I'll make a note of that and I can send that to you for MBA in India.
Because there are two people who've asked about scholarships in India. Also, this is a question totally unrelated to their careers, but 3 students want to know where you completed your MBA from.
I have done my master's, as I mentioned at the start. I've done my master's of international business management, specializing in international human resource management from Ford School of Management. I gave the CAT, so I have pretty much done whatever I've listed here. I did my literature from Delhi University. I did my master's from Ford, but I gave the CAT, and then I decided to switch over and give it a shot for civil services. I have even taken the UPSC prelims, and trust me, they are very challenging when you're working. So I had to quit my job and I decided to switch over from months and then went on to give the civil services. So I did my master's from Ford School of Management, which is in Qutub Institutional Area in Delhi.
Okay, so the next I'm posing two questions together to you. One is whether it is beneficial to do an MBA abroad and then come back to India to work, and the other side of the coin is whether it is worthwhile to do your CA in India and then move abroad.
So just to move towards the CA part first, most universities, business schools abroad consider the CA tenure as experience, and they count it as the postgraduate work experience or the post college completion work experience. So it can come in handy for you. My recommendation is, I've seen both sides of the coin for most of my students, where they have gone abroad, they've decided to stay there and not come back, and they're minting money in dollars and pounds and whatever currency they are in. But again, you need to understand what, where do you fit in? Expecting, a similar salary range as the exchange rate you were earning in may not be very, motivating for you initially. But, the best part about it, you do grow in the ranks. I've had students who've done their MBA from ISB and they are working in different parts of the world, and people who've completed their MBAs from places like HEC, Paris or INSEAD, and they've come back to work in India, and they've come back to join very high designations at senior positions and prominent positions, earning a very good package, but it takes time to reach to that level. So if you expect that you complete an MBA, no exposure, no international exposure, and you come back and join the country, come and join a company in India, in your home country, you may not bring that value addition that the company here wants. Because the reason you're going abroad is to get an international exposure, which is very important. So it always, there will be slight mismatch, but in any sector for a long time, you do match up to it. So that is definitely there. And completing a CA from here definitely, will be an advantage point, because you'll have a strong analytical, analysis-based background, which can move you towards consulting, can move you towards strategy-based roles, and it will be definitely an advantage for you to go after a CA program as well. That's not a problem at all. Okay. Salary packages become better, of course.
Okay, and planning to do her MBA from Canada. She's currently in first year, and right. She wants to know which test is, should she take for the MBA? Oh, the IELTS and the GMAT, or the GMAT.
Yes.
So
yes.
I can answer this, both, Manvinder. Yes, Anuja.
So both of them, GMAT and the IELTS. But one of the things that you should do is simultaneously start building your profile, understanding what you can make yourself, unique with, apart from the grades part of it, and take up internships. I don't know, I can't see the questions per se, but I'm presuming you are either in the BCom program or business economics. Could you confirm which program you are in?
No,
right
Manvinder is in her BA program, and okay. She is in her second year.
Perfect. So in that case, what you need to do is, if you've not really done work on internships, or you've not explored areas that you've done with respect to identifying which field of the business management program you'd like to explore, then I would recommend that you just if you'd like to speak to me, I'd definitely be happy to help to understand and help you identify your skills. But the GMAT and the IELTS both are required. Because you come with a 3-year undergraduate degree, it is important to start building your profile now. It is important to start preparing for the GMAT also. If you've not taken a diagnostic test, you can go to the mba.com website. And if you want, you can note it down, mba.com. They have free diagnostic tests that you can take up, one round of it, by registering your email. So don't address, use another dummy account email ID to register and take a full-length test to see where you stand and whether you are ready for the GMAT. One, most schools also accept the GRE in place of the GMAT. Sometimes the GMAT can be very daunting, It's a slightly more competitive exam. It's slightly more demanding as an exam. So if you feel that your skill set matches the GRE more, then you can take the GRE instead of the GMAT, which is equally accepted at most schools. So it should not be a problem later then. I hope I will.
So Siddharth asks, what is the best coaching for preparing for GMAT and IELTS?
So see, we have the traditional organizations where I work. Princeton Review is there, and then there's Jamboree, which is a different counterpart. We also administer test prep. You can reach out to us. I mean, we can have a free demo session for you to understand how it goes after a diagnostic session. I strongly recommend taking a diagnostic test to understand if you can figure or not, because sometimes the test seems very exciting or it seems like very manageable, but it is not, maybe it may not be up your alley, and you can alternately go for the GRE instead. So we can look at that option per se. And we do offer one-on-one counseling. We have offered batch sessions as well. So if you'd like to reach out for a free demo, we can help you out with. Otherwise, Princeton and Jamboree both have their own renown, so should not be a problem at all.
Right. Now the next question is about what are the best job opportunities after?
So I think I can go back to my slide. Should I go back to my slide? And maybe you could make a note of the points per se. You can move towards jobs which move you towards working in the financial sector. You can move towards accounting. You can work under a CA. You can get into business analysis. You can take up business analytics diplomas and take up courses that give you an advantage per se. So the versatility is far more. You can move towards management. There are lots of things that you can actually move towards. So that is something that is definitely there. I'm trying to figure out how to just go back to that slide, because the career options actually gives you an idea of what you can take up. Again, it totally depends on, this slide could be of help, because I don't know if you can see the screen per se, but this slide gives you an idea of the kind of jobs you can open up. You can go for banking, you can move towards accounting, which are more government jobs, which you take up through the exams and the various exams that are there. And then you can become an accounting professional. You can substantiate it with CA and, move towards business management. It's all about what you want to explore, honestly speaking, if you ask me. I personally feel that it all depends on what you can take up in terms of there. So if you see the programs like I have listed here, this can give you an insight into actuarial sciences and about what more you can do in terms of the studying program. The CA is there. You can become a CFA if you want to move towards more global waters and want to work with organizations which are more internationally have an international perspective. That can also work up per se.
Yeah, so there's a question about actuarial sciences. What is the best place? What place could you recommend for applying for actuarial sciences? And what is better, actuarial sciences in India or abroad? And there is a third related question regarding CA as to whether which institute is best for an Indian CA.
So you take the, you have your preparation test systems that are there. We don't administer CA prep, but I can find out and I can share those details with you, because I do have a lot of students who've decided to go, or who have while they were preparing for the GMAT, also taken their CA, the CPT or the IPCC. So they've done all of. They find out the details and tell you which coaching centers they've gone to, and I'll made a note of that, so I can let you know that as well. In terms of actuarial sciences, what matters is where do you want to be after you complete the program. If you're looking at staying in India, then we have actuarial sciences institutions here as well. I think DU also offers actuarial sciences programs, and we can look at all those assignments as well. But if you're looking at moving towards an international platform, and you want and keep the Indian as well as the study abroad options both intact, then going abroad makes more sense, and you can get a more versatile experience. They say the option is that if you go abroad, you can come back. From here, then moving towards international job assignments may not be all that easy, because then you need to establish your proficiency in their, their internal assessments or the organization's assessments of matching the level from here there. From there, you can even come back and use that knowledge here. So that actually opens up a lot of avenues for you per se. So to be post graduation, which is very important.
Right. And is return on investment from MSc management from UK greater than an MBA from India?
In all honesty, I feel we are comparing apples and oranges, because the MSc management is actually a very introductory level program. And if you expect an MBA with a certain package to match up to the MSc management or vice versa, there is no comparison, because the MSc more of an introductory level program with people with no experience or less experience, and getting into jobs which are maybe the entry level jobs, whereas an MBA would actually skyrocket you to the, sometimes, of course, the management training process is definitely there, but there are certain times when you would actually be moving towards, say, mid-management roles soon after you've completed the MBA program, or, after joining the organization. So if you were to ask me, an MSc management from UK would not match up to the MBA. Where you're doing it from in India would make a difference. If you're talking about the IIMs, the ISB, and the Narsi Monji or FMS, Delhi University, they have a different league. They have a different category of, employment and job opportunities. Of course, at the end of the day, what you are putting into the program is going to make a difference wherever you are. And the MBA is going to be far better valued if I look at it in the long run. So definitely not, there.
Right. I ask the next question, I just want to remind all the students to please fill up the feedback form that has been shared on the, in the chat box. Please fill up the feedback form so that we are able to help you further. Now, there are two questions. I'm sorry, Chetna and Tejas, I know you have sent these questions repeatedly. I will be taking them up. Tejas wants to know the difference between MSc, MBA, and MIM. And Chetna, I'll give you both questions. Chetna is interested in an MA in interpretation and translation. And she wants to know what is better, a private university or a government one, if we have already completed a language course from a private institute. MBA, MIM, and this next one is about MA. Yes.
So see, MSc and MIM are interchangeable when I say so, because most universities, most countries have different terminologies for degree programs. Like we may have the MA program here, but sometimes it's masters in management. It may not even be an MSc. So the MSc and the MIM is interchangeable. There is no difference. It doesn't make it a science degree, unless you're obviously looking at a science program, like let's say mathematics or STEM related program per se. But if you're looking at management, the MSc and the MIM are interchangeable. The MBA program is Masters of Business Administration, is advanced, extensive program that takes you to a different level of applying what you've learned in your experience of being employed in a professional role in various organizations or different companies and industries, to understand what is there. So the difference is in terms of the tenure, in terms of the rigor, in terms of the accreditation also, which matters. So it's important to understand that. That's for the MSc, MIM, and the MBA program. Coming to the government versus private, I would recommend going to a government institution would be better for the translation and interpretation studies, because see, private institutions do offer the program if there are there. But if you do get a chance to, be affiliated with an organization, sometimes the credibility is far more. Documentation is far more. And if you're looking at moving towards the embassies and other places, then it can give you a connection point, because sometimes people who have worked there or who have studied there, the alum network can help you get job opportunities. So I would recommend, if you do not have any restriction of say mobility or any other thing, then please look for the government option for the translation and interpretation studies. It will be far more credible, unless I can't remember of any private interpretation and translation studies that I can think off the top of my hand. But I mean, if I talk about InLingua and stuff, those are fine. But looking at government would be better, I think. I hope I've addressed the question there.
Yeah. So Taranjeet asks if it is advisable to do a job while doing an LLB while preparing for the civil services exams.
Oh my God, that's like, you want to take on one boulder here, and then you have another boulder here, and then one on your head. See, it's all about time management, honestly speaking. There is no right answer to it. If I say that no, it may not be, because maybe I may not be able to do so, or somebody else might not be able to do so. It totally depends on that. But anytime you get into an employment, whether it's even part-time, there are certain expectations that are put onto you. You don't have a chance to get out of them then. And then managing two disparate levels of study programs, like the LLB is obviously you're preparing for it, you're studying and everything, and then preparing for the civil services, which could be an overlap, but it will take a considerable amount of time and attention and energy, with personal commitments of the normal life that we have. Even if, let's say, you disassociate yourself from them, it can be very challenging. So I mean, I personally feel that before you jump into something, test waters and see if you don't. Getting into the job could be the last option, and then look for law and US, like UPSC exams preparations first, and then look at the job opportunity, because job will be demanding along with all of this. In the continuity of study, you can take prelims and subjects that are similar, so that can be an overlap to save you time. But with a job and studies, two different things would be very challenging for you.
Right. And my two bit on that is that if there is no pressure from home, if you do not have financial pressures to take up a job earlier, then try to finish as much of your education before you get into the job market, before you begin working. Because the better your qualifications are, then automatically the job that you get, that first job that you get, will also be of a better quality. But again, this varies from person to person. So now the next question is, how important is versatility in the skills and internships when you are applying abroad? Is it true that a comprehensive personality is preferred abroad as compared to India?
So
and
whether,
can I also add one more question?
Yes,
This is, a reply, coming as against your reply to Manminder about applying to Canada. So she's asking, when should we start preparing for these tests, the GRE and the IELTS?
see, again, as I said, taking a diagnostic test, I'll address the shorter one first. So taking the diagnostic test would actually help you understand how much time you need to prepare. So it will give you an idea of whether you need 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. Sometimes students take as much as 8 months also. So it totally depends on, whether you want to take an attempt, say now in the second year, and because I think you're at the threshold of the third year now. So when you start the third year, that's the right time to take the exam. So not later than that, of course, because August, September, if you're in the third year, August, September 2021 is when you will start applying for, if you're looking at a non-MBA program. But if you're looking at an MBA, you can take time, prepare, see where you want to go, and then choose accordingly. So, depends on which area of interest you're looking at and everything. And ma'am, you'll have to repeat your previous question, because I've kind of
yes, Siddharth Sharma was talking about, the wholesomeness of applying, the versatility of skills and internships when you're applying abroad, and whether a comprehensive personality is, what the foreign universities are looking at.
So versatility definitely adds that zing factor to your application. The most important thing is, how do you bind them? It's not that suddenly one fine day you woke up and you decided to do volunteering, and the next day you decided to take up a language and stuff. You need to see how you've been continuing it. Like, I have students who've done music. They've been doing music and they've taken the different levels, and they've done those for a certain number of years. If I talk about somebody who's doing volunteering work, they've not done it for the past 6 months. They've been doing it for the past few years, because that adds value to your overall, perspective. So all of that, when put together, it depends on how you bind everything together. So versatility could be, in terms of activities, it could be in terms of community service initiatives, it could be in terms of skills. When I talk about skills, I'm talking about, maybe you want to learn some coding, or you've completed some online certification programs and all of that. So all of those put together will add value to what you want to do per se. And it all depends on how you bind it together and for what program. If you're going for, say, a specific program, let's say like business analytics, or you're going in for something that talks about you taking up a specific skill, you're going for interpretation and you need the language advantage, then all those levels of, the languages that you take up actually adds a lot of value to you. So versatility will depend on the program you're also targeting, and what all you can do and how much you need to do to keep in mind there. It should not be like you just like a diverse bouquet of flowers and you don't know what you want. It should be like, it should, complement each other. But this is what, interests me, and this is what I like to do. And this could be something that I do in my spare time, but, it still gives me it links me up to the activities I do in the other fields.
Right. And now I have a question. How important is work experience while applying for a master's degree abroad? Is it mandatory, or freshers can also apply for MBA?
So abroad MBA, unless you're looking at just compromising and running away to a program which is not accredited, the MBA programs will admit you. Any ruling, that's the AMBA, Association of MBA, that is there, that accredits most MBA programs, makes it mandatory for students to have 2 to 3 years of work experience, depending on the country and the university of the business school per se. So it is recommended strongly that if you want to send in a competitive application, unless you have very dire circumstances, but the work experience, the quantity could be reduced. But overall, they need that 2 years of work experience, because they don't want a class which is just a turnout of freshers. They want a class that contributes to with their skills, their experiences, and knowledge. So that is why, if you see the cohort, if you see the student profiles or the class profiles, they would say an average work experience is 4 to 5 years or 5 to 6 years, because they want people with 2 to 3 years of work experience to come and contribute their learnings, their challenges, their failures, and make the class diverse so that the others learn and do not make those mistakes. The others learn from the other skill set to add to their knowledge pool. So that is why they want experience. So if you are looking at an MBA, I would strongly recommend, and this is particularly for the MBA program and certain business analytics programs, certain, not all, that you should preferably have some work experience or functional application of your skills in education to be able to use it in the MBA program in the future. It's very important.
Right, thank you. Now, this is a student applying for an MA abroad, and he wants to know whether it makes sense to do an MA and then apply for a PhD, or should he, right at the outset, go in for an integrated MA and PhD?
So integrated MA and PhDs are very, very less in number. There was a time when I started my career 15 years back. That time they were integrated PhD programs, and they now have dispersed off, because universities were actually there were lots of people who would actually go and continue their PhD, but there were several of them who would enroll for the integrated PhD program, fail their qualifiers, and get out with a terminal master's. So the universities got smarter and then decided that you come either for the PhD or you come for the master's program. Now it depends on the kind of profile you have. If you've done extensive research work, if you have a profile that is heavy with research, which talks about publishing journals and articles, and you have assignments that talk about your ability to research at length for that particular subject, then it makes sense for you to go for a direct PhD. But if you're still building your profile and you've really not done a lot of research, even for the masters, for say, if you're looking at, if you could give me a background on what program you're coming from, then I can, give you more specific details on that then. Because research...
He's in BA program.
He's in BA program. So for that, ma'am, it would be necessary to remember that, you should have research at the master's level, at least 1 or 2 publications, be associated with those. It will add value. It will make your application stronger. But for a PhD, I would recommend, unless you have a couple of research publications, research involvements, going for an MA program would give you that introduction. If you're good at a university, sometimes they integrate the MA program to the PhD qualifier. It's the other way around. Instead of you going for an integrated PhD program, they may blend it together with the MA and the PhD program for you then. So that can also be the case. So I mean, I always recommend that if you are looking at studying abroad, the sooner you go, the better it is, because you adapt to the system, you're crossing certain hurdles. And PhD admissions are competitive. So you have to really, you have to have a supervisor, you need to get the requirement in terms of the scores that are needed. Your profile needs to have a strong research focus. So if you have all of these covered, then it makes sense. But going at the master's level will open up avenues for you to just jump from one program to another then. So that will be easier, so going for a master's and then moving to a PhD.
Thank you. Now, how is a diploma degree beneficial to us, I assume to a graduate student, and how to get an internship in public policy and research work?
So a diploma versus a degree is what I'm presuming, ma'am. Or
I do think he means along with. Yes, Akalpreet, if you're there, can you put on your mic and clarify?
So I saw Mandeep's question, which is for BCom banking exams. I'll also get back to you on that. I'm making a note of your questions.
Yes, no, he means just a diploma. He's
just a diploma. And in India and abroad. Because if you're looking at India, it depends on what the diploma is all about and what you're looking at in terms of the knowledge. If you're looking at, say, a diploma in translation, that will work. If you're looking at a diploma in travel and tourism, that will work, because then it's more of skill set based. But if you're just looking at completing a diploma and say moving towards...
He's saying a diploma in psychology. And Akalpreet, where, in India or abroad? You can put on your mic if you like. In India, he is asking about the value of a diploma in psychology in India.
See, if you have a degree, the degree will hold a far greater value than a diploma, because if you're using psychology as diploma to supplement something that you have in terms of your the larger scheme of things, then it makes sense to add on to it. But if you're looking at moving towards therapy or moving towards psychology as a profession, then it makes sense to go for a degree program. Like, if whatever you've done in the undergrad is fine, you can go and take up an MA in psychology, or you can, if you have a science background, you can do a master's of science in psychology and even become a clinical psychologist if you want to move towards that profession. But a diploma versus a degree, any day the degree would hold a far greater, standing in terms of the employment, in terms of everything. Even if tomorrow you were to employ somebody, you would also want somebody with a degree in psychology if it's related to that field. But again, as I said, if it's supplementing what you have in terms of an interest, then it's a different story altogether.
Right. Manpreet, are you on the call? She's asked this question and I did address it, but I think it's not clarified. She's asked which country is best for Indian CA. Manpreet, would you like to put on your mic and ask? Manpreet, are you there? Now, the thing is, we've got a lot of questions and time is running out. We don't want to hold Anubha too long. So very quickly, I'd like, 2 or 3 of you to put on your mics. We'll just take the last 2 or 3 questions with Anubha. Yes, Amanpreet, would you like to ask yourself? Okay, nobody is putting on their mic, so I will ask. Again, Manpreet, you're asking for the country, but you've also said Indian CA. So please, oh, I see, I'm sorry. So can I request the host to unmute the participants?
Can I do that? I don't know. I'm just trying
to
see.
Either Sukhvinder or you would be able to do it. I'm so sorry.
Nidhi, I've already done. Just
okay, you can just unmute yourselves. Ma'am has already...
I'm asking for the country which is best for Indian CAs. Like ma'am told us about the coaching, but I wanted the country which is best for Indian CA.
Okay, so you're already a CA from India.
Okay. So see, it all depends on what, what value addition you can create. Of course, if you're looking at moving abroad, then, uh, a CFA would give you that advantage of taking up international work. It will give you that advantage to move towards, taking up assignments, because what you've been taught here in the CA market here in India would may not apply to the country you're going in for. So, that advantage point would come up when you've taken a certain, some certification courses for that particular country, because you can upgrade your knowledge per se. So any country, actually, if you ask me, it totally depends on what you're looking for in terms of employment. But if you want to stay where you go, then countries like Canada, Australia, Europe, these are opening up avenues and doors for people to come and stay and continue their, their journey per se. So that is definitely that they're what they're looking for per se. So that is there. So if I say one particular country, it needs to be basis where you want to go, because there CAs are indispensable. If you ask me, anyone in the financial sector is indispensable. So you create your value addition, basis the country you're going for. Then
Right. Ravneet, your question? Ravneet, you
Uh,
can, yeah.
Good evening, ma'am. Ma'am, as
what do
I
you think?
am doing ma'am BCom, but ma'am, people are saying that BCom is not that much valuable, like BCom honors. So, ma'am, after BCom, ma'am, what are the ma'am further career options that we can proceed?
See, I'm sorry, I missed your name, Manpreet. No, what was your
Ravneet.
name? Navneet. Sorry.
And
So
Ravneet also referred to the slide which is right here.
yeah, so
Yes.
I've just got it open. So see, the BCom honors program is one option, but it's not applicable only to the BCom honors. You can choose from either of these options. See, Ravneet, you need to remember one thing: whatever you are doing is, it totally depends on what you want to add to it. So if you're looking at career options, you need to choose from, your interests, identify your interests, and choose from what you want to do. So if you want to be an actuarial science student, or you want to practice actuarial sciences, you want to move towards that field, then there is no restricting you, unless you feel you can't live up to the rigor of the role or the program that you're looking for. So it totally depends on what you want to do. I mean, uh, do not do not go by the common hearsay that a BCom degree is going to be. I mean, I'm not comparing the two. I'm not comparing the two here, and I'm not starting a war of honors versus non-honors. But my point here is that it totally depends on what your metal is all about, what you want to do. Do not just look at the fact that, oh, this is not good enough. Maybe you could do so much better than an honors student. So, look at what your interests are. If you refer to the website, the slide in front of you, they have everything which is related to, if you want to choose a career in banking and finance, take up a specialist knowledge, take up a substantiate your existing program with a specialized training, whether it's an MBA, whether it's MCOM or a Masters of Science, and then move from there. That would actually give you the knowledge advantage that you see. And then nothing is going to restrict you from, being anything
Ma'am, I
being
have
good enough
interest
or
in
not.
banking and finance, and I am doing. Ma'am, I am a business correspondent agent of ma'am
Mm-hmm.
two banks, Bank of Baroda and Punjab National, working with them.
Wonderful. Hmm.
So, ma'am, to make my CV more strong, after that, also, ma'am, I am doing all the ma'am government works and I have a idea of income tax filing, ITR, and National Securities of Depository Limited for
Wonderful.
PAN card.
Hmm.
I am doing ma'am these types of work, ma'am. I am having the interest in these type works.
So what I would recommend is, because you're already affiliated with two banks, speak to them,
Yes,
find out
ma'am.
what will help you to get into a more permanent role there. Of course, what I mentioned earlier, the PO exams and the centralized exams that you can take up are definitely there. But the best person to tell you what it can help you get in with your current qualification would be the bank you're associated with. Why? Because they will actually understand you beyond your just the degree program. They know you from your skill set. Actually, that would be a really helpful way to get to know more. And I'm not when I'm now, the next sentence that I'm going to say is actually doing far more than most BCom honors students would be doing. So I think you're on the right path. There's nothing to worry, and do not let the level of the program just be a deciding factor. So, you know Just go out there. You're doing fine. You're absolutely on the right track. Just take the assessment exams, take the PO exams. That will get you to a more permanent government role in the future.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for your wonderful advice.
Thank you. My
Wonderful.
pleasure.
And Ravneet, I'm also very impressed by your CV. Very good. Yes, Siddharth is next with his
Okay,
question.
thank you, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am. I wanted to ask that when you talk about colleges such as Imperial College and University College of London or the King's College, they quote that the average package for Masters in Management is around 70,000 US dollars per annum. So, is that the correct figure that students do get from graduating out of those universities or not? And the next, because I talked to a German who's studying over there, and he told me around 50,000 USD is something that the students get out from there. And the one more question that I have is that since we'll be applying in the year 2021 in in the month of September, we won't be having a final mark sheets with us. So how do we address to that issue?
So in terms of the package details, see, every year the figures change. Uh, to be honest, they are averages of students who've got much lower and higher, and that's the range that they give. So if you see an average figure would be anything between $55,000 to $65,000 is what the average international student salary package is across all universities. Even if I talk about the likes of the Harvard or talk about Oxford and stuff, the range is pretty similar because there is a lot of investment that also goes when an international student is recruited in an organization. So they balance it out there per se. But an average range would be anything between $65,000 to $80,000 for international students. Higher and lower ranges are definitely there. There is no fixed thing that 70,000 is going to be the thing. So that's not going to be a clear indicator. You start slow, but you do if you are consistent, then you do definitely get a better package in the long run. But keep a $65,000 per annum range in mind. In terms of addressing your question about the transcripts, universities understand that the application cycle varies from the academic cycle for universities across the globe. So they give you the chance to put in your first and second year final results that are there. They also give you the chance to send in whatever interim mark sheets, and you have your internal assessments, your mocks, and your exams and entrance, whatever assignment based evaluations you have now. They all add up to your final grade. You take the transcript, you send your mark sheets, you send whatever is in hand, and then they give you conditional offer of admission. Once you have an offer of admission and you meet the conditions after you get your final results, that conditional offer is converted to an unconditional one for the visa purposes. So that is the basic route out. So they understand that they don't restrict it. Of course, if you've got pending exams or you've got exams that are to be cleared, then they might ask for an additional DMCs that come, the individual mark sheets that come. So that is definitely there. But overall, the universities abroad understand completely that the application cycle and the academic cycle vary. So that's okay.
Oh, thank you so much, ma'am.
My pleasure.
Right. Amanpreet, you wanted to ask a question? You can unmute yourself, Amanpreet. Just press unmute. Anyway, her question is the banking line a good one after BA program? And which banks are better, private or government? And I'd also like to link this to Mandeep Kaur Chavda's question, where she's asking, can we prepare for banking PO exams instead of doing an MBA? Both of them are doing a BCom program.
Okay. So it totally depends on your interest, if I may say so, because the banking finance sector is it's consistently booming. I mean, in all my career, I mean, I have never encountered a challenge that has come through the banking and finance sector. Of course, there are good days and bad days in every industry, every business, every organization. But the money is not going to go anywhere. Banks are not going to go anywhere. So the consistency works fine. It depends on where you want to be. If you want to be with organizations or the banks, the private banks may pay more. They may give you a more corporate vibe towards things of earning better, getting more perks, getting more advantages per se, as opposed to the government ones which give more stability, or you may have the pension schemes and other things that do come up. So all these things vary depending on what you want to see. If you want a more, if you don't, if you see yourself being in one role for a certain number of years, and you want to be in a transferable job, for instance, like the government banks have these transfers that may happen across states, across zones. So if you're okay with all of that, that also works out fine. So it totally depends on where do you see yourself fitting in. And banking and finance is never going out of fashion or business. So definitely that works out fine. In terms of comparing MBA versus a banking PO thing, it's a personal choice if you ask me. And MBA finance will not get you to the banking sector, in the role that you would be. You will be moving towards the more management-driven roles. If I talk about, the MBA finance program or the MBA banking related programs per se, but a PO in bank will take you from the various ranks of being a part of the organization, the banking system, and then rise from, say, the different levels and cadres that you clear your exams with, and then move towards, the various levels that you need to reach over the years, over your tenure of being associated with them. So it totally is going to be a personal choice. If you want to move towards the more corporate vibe of things, then taking up like a private bank and an MBA could be one option. But if you're looking at something more, more structured, more docile, if I may say so, and then the Indian banking, the government banks would be better there.
Right. So now we are just taking two final questions. One is from Rajveer and then Akshat. And, just both of you, please keep it short, because Miss Anubha has already overshot the time that she had committed with us. Thank you so much, Anubha, for that. Yes, Rajveer. Rajveer, are you there? Please unmute yourself.
Hello?
Yes,
Hello?
I can hear you now.
Okay. Ma'am, I'm pursuing BCom honors right now, and I feel immediately after finishing it to get into a good college for MBA. So what should I do first? Should I do a job or something, and then do MBA, or what should I do? Like doing a job would be beneficial or not?
So an MBA are you talking about an MBA in India or MBA abroad? Hello, Rajveer? Hello? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Okay.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
So Rajveer, I asked the question, do you want to do an MBA in India or abroad?
No, I'm not sure about it right now, and that would be more clear after a period of time, because I'm not sure about the opportunities what I'll get all the time.
Okay. So see, if you're not sure, what I would recommend that you get some time off from, to get experience and then decide. Because see, going abroad, the MBA program requires you to have 2 to 3 years of experience for sure. There is no way out of that. They want an experience from you. They want you to go with that 2 to 3 year tenure of working in a professional space, understanding management, understanding leadership, understanding if you're in a, say, high career progression role, then it definitely adds up to it. So that all will be a part of it. I'm sorry, your voice is not very clear.
If I would get into a good, ma'am, I have thought that if I would get into a good IIM, so I'll do it in India, and if I won't get into it, then I'll go.
So see, if you talk about the IIMs, you can apply without experience. You can go with CAT and everything. But if you're talking about the ISBs, which is like say the ISB in India, then you need to have 2 years of work experience here as well, because that's what they want. But the other thing that you can also look at is, let's say you take the CAT. So if you're looking at IIMs, you need to start preparing for the CAT. You need to start your preparation to get ready, which happens now. If you're Are you in the third year? If you're in the third year, then you need to start now. If you're in your second year, then you need to start immediately again, because that will give you enough time to prepare, be ready for the first exam, and see how you are. So all of that makes a lot of difference. But for abroad, your basic timeline is 2 to 3 years of work experience. India, you can still go without experience at most institutions, but abroad you need to have 2 to 3 years of experience.
Like now I am in first year, and before just getting into the college, I gave the exam of IPM MAT for getting into IM into the 5 years MBA plus BBA plus MBA course. But I couldn't clear the interview in IM Indore. So I was thinking to prepare for CAT because the syllabus is very little different, and there are only few topics which are different between CAT and IPM MAT. So I was thinking to like keep up with those studies, and now to change the course into the for the CAT course, so that by the time being I'll finish my third year, immediately I could get into a good IIS after preparing these years.
Right. So what I would recommend is that you start preparing for the CAT sometime in once you start your second year. Give it enough time. Go slow. You can start on your own and then prepare. There are lots of these organizations and institutions that have comprehensive 1 year programs, 2 year programs, depending on how much time you want. So you can take some time out and prepare accordingly and decide what you want to do per se. So we can choose accordingly there. But abroad, again, as I mentioned, you need experience. In India, you can still prep up, get ready. These institutions, training institutions, do have interview prep, so they get formal training, so you know where your areas for improvement can be addressed, basically.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And
right. So with that, we come to the end of a very exhaustive explanation. I'm sure
I have
the
one
students
question that I'd like to address, which is mentioned by Akalpreet Singh, which is I just want to ask that, for example, anybody who's confused between two career options, but his or her interest is in both. How do we choose between the two? Which one is beneficial or not? So Akalpreet, the best idea to do this is to explore through internships. If you're in your first year, take up internships in the second and the third year. Get practical understanding of what career options can interest you. I have students in high school who are taking internships at or completing short-term tenure-based internships at architecture's office or lawyer's firm, and to get to know more about the field. So the best way is to understand how the thing is in practical application rather than just theoretical learning through books. So that will give you an idea of what you're going to do for the next 5 to 8 years or 10 years of your life minimum. And then if you like it, great, continue. If you don't like it, you can obviously switch over to something better. So now I think I'm done, ma'am.
Right.
I couldn't let this question be. It was just, there in my system.
Yes, no, thank you for being so patient with the questions. I want to remind all the students to fill up that feedback form so that we are able to get, a feel of how you felt through the session. And now I'd like to propose a formal vote of thanks to you, Anubha. Thank you so much for taking out the time and being so patient with the students. I'm sure they've enjoyed the session thoroughly. And I've been getting messages also that, they enjoyed it and they would like to have another session with you. So I said, let this one end first.
Thank you so much. That's really kind. Thank you.
Yeah, so formally, I would like to thank you for taking out the time. I would like to thank, of course, our principal, Dr. Gurmohinder Singh, through, under whose guidance we are able to conduct this Mentoring the Mentor program. And, we are able to have speakers like you over. The entire mentoring group for their support and their participation in the event. All my, esteemed colleagues who are attending, and especially a big thanks to the students who participated so enthusiastically and, asked questions. I hope you have enjoyed being a part of this session. Thank you so much. Thank you, Anubha.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.